You're listening to episode 221 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practices from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Tanya McGinnity and John Negru join us to speak about Sumeru Press's current book project, Writings by Canadian Buddhist Women. After a recent interview, one of the guests asked if I was Canadian. Not really a surprising question. As a Minnesotan for a couple of decades now, the differences between how I sound and how my neighbors and friends to the north sound may be a bit subtle. Canada has an amazing richness of Buddhist teachers, practitioners, and writers, especially women Buddhist writers showcased in an upcoming anthology from Sumeru Press. Tanya McGinnity has been interested in Buddhism for a few years, the later half of the Roaring 90s to be exact, yet it all still feels fresh to her. She has been sharing her experiences of studying and practicing the Dharma on her blog, Full Contact Enlightenment, since 2006. Tanya is currently a member of Nalanda Bodhi and is a student of Dzogchen Ponlop Rinpoche. She has a great love for the Shambhala organization where she got her start on the cushion and has also been known to jump in the meditation pit with the Dharma Punks crew. Tanya has a lifelong dream to study Buddhism academically, but should that not happen in this lifetime, she knows the opportunity may present itself again in another lifetime. John Negru, Karma Yonten Gyatso, is the founder of Sumeru, a publisher of Buddhist books. He hosts Canada's leading Buddhist news blog and National Temple Directory. He has worked, published, and taught in the design field for more than 40 years. John came to the Dharma practice in 1968, and over the years he has served on the boards of several temples and has been involved in a variety of community development projects, including having acted as coordinator of the Toronto Buddhist Federation, Toronto coordinator for the Buddhist Council of Canada, and consultant to the University of Toronto's Buddhist Psychology and Mental Health program. His most recent project with the University of Toronto Department of Religious Studies was a 2-year sociological survey of Canadian Buddhist organizations, key findings of which were published in the Journal of Global Buddhism in 2013. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice La Fin du Monde. And our guests today are Tanya McGinnity. Tanya, welcome to the podcast.
Hi there, Ted.
And John Negru. John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Hi, Ted. Hi, Tanya.
Hey, John.
This is so wonderful because, as many of the listeners know, I have been a fan of Tanya's Full Contact Enlightenment for a very long time, and I've asked her for years to be on the podcast. So finally, we have a reason to bring you on board and talk about this one project we're going to be talking about. But we have the added benefit of having John from SumeruBooks.com, and so we'll get a chance to share and hear about some of that as well. But I want to start by asking each of you to tell us a little bit about your path in Buddhism, what introduced you to it, and what kept you going. Tanya, let's start with you.
Sure. I became interested in Buddhism. I think the usual route for a Gen X disappointed kid with all that suffering and angst and anxiety. I was reading Siddhartha, and then I picked up a copy of the Shambhala Sun that had Ad Yauk from the Beastie Boys on it, and I started reading it, and I was like, is this really the gateway drug to Buddhism? There's something there for me. Like, I was reading it, and it just, something resonated for me that I just felt like I really needed to go deeper and investigate. And I was living in a very small town in Canada where the only real access I had was bookstores, used bookstores, where I would go. And, I didn't really know what I was identifying with, whether it was Zen, whether it was Tibetan, what it was. So I was buying books on everything, like anything I could find that was at this used bookstore. And, just kind of, took an interest. And as I read more and more, discovered Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche and the Shambhala crew. Living close to Halifax, which is one of the hotbeds of Shambhala in North America, I was able to spend some time just taking some of the Shambhala training courses as part of their path, and really fell in love with it. It was, during that period of time as a younger adult, that I really just started investigating more. And yeah, it's been a labor of love since. I'm now doing a lot of practices and study with the Nalanda Bodhi group. And I think for me, that's been really kind of my entry into it, as well, just with the Dharma punks as well, just speaking to my more aggressive and punk rock side too. So those have been really kind of, the core groups that have really resonated with me. But I'm kind of one of those equal opportunity. I don't know if it's just a nature of my generation that we like that kind of exploration. So, I dabble in Zen and Zen reading, and there are a lot of Zen teachers that really resonate with me. And it's been an exciting trip so far.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And John, how about you in your path to Buddhism? You've been doing this for a while.
Quite a while, yes, since the 60s. And that's the last century, 60s. I grew up as a fairly secular humanist Jewish young man in Montreal at a time when things were not very spiritual, I'd say, pretty institutional. And during the 60s, at that time of tumult and revolution with the Beatles going to visit the Maharishi and so on, I had been starting to read what very few books there were available on Buddhism at that time. I think the first Buddhist book I read was Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, which had been edited by Paul Reps, and happened to find out that there was a Buddhist teacher in Montreal by the name of Samyu Sunim who had just arrived from Korea. And I went to visit him. I was terrified. I went up the stairs to his apartment, and I was afraid he was going to beat me and throw me down the stairs, as any good Zen master would do. But he turned out to be a very nice guy, and basically he said, I just got here. My English is terrible. Why don't you go study with one of my students, Tyndale Martin, at the Montreal Zen Center, and, he can help you at this point better than I can. So I went there, started meditating, and wound up living as a monastic there for about 5 years, a little over 5 years. And since we were one of the only games in town at that time, any Buddhist teachers who happened to come through Montreal, we met. So I met Chogyam Trungpa when he was fresh in Canada. Kalu Rinpoche, who first came to Canada in 1972, we followed him across Canada and spent a month with him in Vancouver with Lama Tsewang Germain when he set up his center in Vancouver. So basically, I got to see some very spiritual people who didn't just talk the talk, but actually walked the walk too. And that was extremely impressive for me. And I thought, oh, gee, there are people that actually do have a practice that you can follow, and you can become the person that you dream yourself to be. Anyway, to make a long story short, I was interested enough to keep practicing and keep meeting other teachers. And when I moved to Toronto in 1975, again, as Tanya was saying, I found that Samyu Sunim had moved to Toronto and he had things to offer. Karma Tinley Rinpoche was here and he had things to offer. I had been studying with Geshe Kenrab in Montreal, and he had things to offer. So I realized that we can look back in retrospect now at how Buddhism has evolved in North America, but this kind of eclecticism really appealed. So when I was in Toronto in the early 1980s, I was involved in an initiative called the Toronto Buddhist Federation. It was one of the first organizations that tried to bring all the different groups together for monthly meetings to talk about issues that were relevant to all of the temples. And so in order for me to function as the coordinator for that group, I had to be non-aligned. And that's kind of a position that I've maintained ever since. So I have continued to practice independently. I have many Dharma friends. I feel I have a very good Sangha support, but I'm not really affiliated with any particular lineage or tradition. And then, of course, as that evolved, I kind of got to a point where I said, hey, this isn't really about me. This is more about what I can do in my practice for other people. And that kind of evolved into the whole Sumeru website and talking about Canadian Buddhism. And basically, here we are now.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And it's interesting that that's part of what we three share is that eclecticism that you mentioned, that, Tanya, you have these different threads that led you to where you are now. John, you're doing the same thing. And it's so for me as well. I wonder if that's simply a part of our Western American kind of culture, that it is a little bit of a mixed bag in what we have, and that we may not be seeing the close adherence to having that one teacher, but we're learning from a lot of different people because they each have something good to offer.
It's interesting. I know with Nalanda Bodhi, with Ponlop Rinpoche, there's quite a few times where he's on panels with multi-faith panels and discussions. And that's what I appreciate so much, is that it's, it seems to be a part of certain groups and certain traditions. And I don't know if it's, if it's just the three of us or if it is something, because I have seen in some cases, some blowback of like, well, how can you be truly serious about, your practice if you're sampling from all the, the buffet, so it's interesting.
I don't think it's sampling from the buffet. I'm thinking of what some Buddhist scholars have said about the development of Buddhism in North America, and saying that some of the major trends have been the laification of teaching, the secularization of teaching, the feminization of teaching, and the democratization of teaching. I don't think that those are trends that are unique to us. I think that, as you say, Ted, they really are part and parcel of the transformation of Buddhism to this new culture of North America. And I think those are good things. I know that there can be blowback from some people saying, oh, how can you, not devote yourself to one kind of teaching? I know that there are other people who say that you really have to get back to the more traditional Asian models of structuring how people practice. But I think that this eclecticism is good within Buddhism itself, but also, as you say, Tanya, in terms of interfaith dialogue, and in terms of seeing Buddhism in terms of the larger context of all of the other issues that we deal with in civilization, and how we resolve and evolve within those models too. So we learn from science and technology, we learn from popular culture, we deal with things like how do we, like eco-Buddhism or engaged Buddhism. We have to engage with the world.
Yeah, and the many different aspects of our lives. I was thinking that I really loved and learned a lot from Mrs. Feigl, my grade school science teacher. But that dedication doesn't mean that I didn't learn from other teachers, and I didn't just stick with the one. And that's not in any way a disrespectful commentary on what a great teacher she was. It's just there are other lots of great teachers out there, and they have something valuable to contribute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think so many people in some cases feel pressured to sign on to a tradition when really, in my case, in the beginning, I had no choice because there were no sanghas in my neighborhood or even remotely nearby that it was pretty much, a sampling of books and videos and everything I could find online until I really got to the point where something did resonate. Maybe for some people it doesn't resonate, or maybe for some people everything resonates.
Yeah, it takes more than just one instrument to make an orchestra.
Very true.
So we're here to talk about an upcoming anthology of writings by Canadian Buddhist women. And maybe, Tanya, you can tell us about how this project got started.
Sure. Well, I think just due to the geographical nature of John and I being close proximity in North America, being Canadian, we've been kind of friends online for the last little while, just having Buddhist blogs and being Canadian and being on social media and active. We, have been communicating quite a bit. And in all honesty, I really don't know whose idea it was. I think we both just kind of hooked up this plan where it was hatched, where it was this sounds like a good idea. This sounds like something necessary. Great. You can get some people together. Great. You have a publishing company. Great. Let's do it. So it's very, DIY in a lot of ways that I honestly, for the life of me, you can correct me, John, I really don't know the origin of this.
John, what do you think?
I think Tanya's pretty much nailed it. I think when you get passionate people together in a room or online in a cyber room, so to speak, people talk and they say, wow, wouldn't it be great if we did this? And because we're both a couple of doer kind of people, we said, yeah, let's do this. And so we said, okay, let's do it. And we really did it.
Awesome. So, John, what do you find most compelling about this particular project?
Well, Sumeru Books started off as a blog and book publishing company focused pretty much on raising awareness about Buddhism in Canada and honoring all of the different lineages and traditions and so on. And I started off by getting a lot of books by old white men. And they were good books, and they still are good books. But I was hungry for more.
A paucity of diversity.
Exactly. And also, I was getting more and more requests from Buddhist authors in other countries who had good books they wanted to publish but couldn't find the right venue to do it. So there's kind of this melange of interesting projects I'd like to do, other interesting projects that were coming my way. And in the midst of all this, I was having a conversation with Charles Prebish about doing a book of Buddhist humor.
Oh, good old Chuck.
Yeah. And so we said, hey, let's just put it out there in the universe. Let's crowdsource this book and see what happens. So, we put the word out there and Justin Whitaker publicized it and a few other people and so on. And we got a total of, I think, one response. So whether that means that Buddhists have no sense of humor or not, I don't know. But basically the whole project went nowhere. But it did get me thinking about crowdsourcing the combined intelligence of Sangha members to do something of value. And then I was having this conversation with Tanya, and we sort of said, well, gee, why aren't there more women's voices that we're hearing? We know there's lots of good Buddhist women teachers in Canada. We know there's lots of Buddhist women practitioners in Canada who can write interesting things. Let's make some platform for these people to be heard. So I kind of floated that idea a few places, and Arun at Angry Asian Buddhist said, hey, this sounds like a great idea, but make sure you have not just old white women.
Right.
Right?
You go, Arun, you're right.
Yeah. So I said that to Tanya, and she worked very hard to make sure that we really do have a representative mix of people whose voices get heard.
And that's something I really want to thank both of you for in ensuring that occurs, because it's shifting, it's taking time, but it's the same experience in growing up in my Buddhist career that it was older white guys. And as an older white guy, although, yeah, that made sense, there was not the kind of diversity that I want to see in gender, in race, in any number of things. And that seems to be changing slowly. I just heard from one of my colleagues doing mindfulness stuff that they just got through a session and the diversity had increased dramatically since the last time they'd done this. So we're both very, very hopeful that the tide is starting to turn finally. And Tanya, how about you? What made you have to do this project?
Well, when I started out as a youngster, that was back in zine culture where we were self-publishing, but it was mainly paper and Xerox and cutting up newsprint and basically, writing our own little diatribes about these very things that we're talking about in terms of racism, sexism, homophobia, all of that. So we were self-publishing, and to me that was kind of an exciting time to be able to kind of get my voice out. So when John mentioned this, it was kind of like, well, this is kind of interesting, having been a blogger and that being one of the big outlets to get my voice out and to be vocal on these kinds of issues that I don't really think get enough, coverage, be it Buddhist media, be it any media. Sometimes these things make people uncomfortable, or we don't like admitting it, or we don't like investigating it. So for us together to collaborate on this, and in all honesty, we're both project management. We come from project management backgrounds. So we're both hyper organized, hyper disciplined, hyperactive people that just have been able to really get this done. And I think my main interest really just stems from that whole, somebody's going to give you a microphone, you'd better take it. If you're being underrepresented, if that opportunity happens, either you make it and you create a zine, or you write a blog, or you create a podcast and you talk about those issues. And the minute you get that mic handed, either you just run with it.
So Tanya, have you run across some inspirations or aha moments while you've been working on the book?
Oh, the whole thing has just been wonderful. I mean, just from compiling the list and really thinking about that inclusivity and looking to kind of, dig, doing some research to think of who are these voices, putting the word out and promoting it. That in itself has been an aha moment that it's made me much more mindful in anything that I do, that I have to have that mindfulness of, inclusivity. So that's just overall, it's been something I've taken away from this project that, I've always wanted everybody to feel welcome, but, this book has kind of been like that open door kind of format, where nobody, when you're editing a book, you kind of have that heavy handed, like, I'm editing, but everybody's voice, there wasn't really anything to edit from the sense of it's your authentic voice. It's grammar at this point, it's purely that. So that's been an aha moment in the sense of just resting with some of that authenticity. From a personal standpoint, many of the pieces, speak to motherhood and speak to grieving. And I think those are ones that just, based for me, have been really resonating and, just in my own life, that they've been things that I really thought would be very difficult to work with and edit. And they've helped me, I think, deepen my willingness to kind of go into exploring that kind of scary stuff with people and with their emotions, and to do so in a compassionate way. So I think few of those pieces have been very, very visceral and very emotional, for the people writing them, submitting them, and having the bravery to submit them. And then for me to sit with that as well.
Yeah, and thank you for honoring that, because it can be very difficult as an editor to not impose your own voice on someone else's words.
Definitely. I think it's been powerful in so many ways that many of the women that have contributed have been contributing tributes to their teachers, or, people that they've, felt empowered by or just so inspired by. So it's been that kind of opening my eyes to new people I wasn't aware of that were teachers or inspirations that I'd never heard of, that really never had the audience or never been covered anywhere. So it's, quite a few aha moments have happened for me that I'm like, really? That woman did that? Or that woman created this? It's remarkable.
Yeah, that's one of the great perks of those of us who do this kind of work, even if it's not our day job, is that we have so many gems that are uncovered in our work that we just had no idea. And we wouldn't get to do that. We wouldn't get to discover that at all if we weren't doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah. John, how about for you? Sumeru Press is, speaking of inspirations, Sumeru Press is doing something a little different with the net proceeds. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I think that in Canada, we have a zeitgeist of feeling alone and at great distance from everybody else. And part of my Dharma vow has always been to help promote networking between different Dharma practitioners. So we do get to feel that sense of community that sometimes is difficult to attain. And of course, the cyber sphere allows us to do that in a whole new way. So when we decided to do this book, or we committed to do this book, and we realized that it was going to be an anthology of a lot of different voices, and as Tanya says, we weren't going to edit with a heavy hand. We were just going to copy edit what people said to make sure that the format was consistent and so on. And then I started to think, well, how could you sell a book like this and give royalties to 25 or 26 or 30 different people? It doesn't make sense, right? But everybody could probably get on board with saying, hey, we don't charge for Dharma teaching. What can we do to make this book like that? Well, why don't we all just contribute our time and our effort and go with a gift economy model and say, let's donate all of the profits to a Buddhist charity. So we're doing it out of love. Nobody's going to get rich off this thing. But if we can do it, we're going to say something that's of value to a lot of people. And hopefully we can help change the world in some small way. So we're going to donate all of the money to the Buddhist Compassion Tzu Chi Foundation in Vancouver, and they can use the money for Buddhist causes, perhaps relating to initiatives for women and children.
And so extended thanks then to everyone who's involved in the project, who's donating their heart and their passion.
Absolutely, and their sweat equity.
Yeah, and I also wanted to call out in particular, your cover art is donated as well, correct?
Yes, by Carol Leslie from Zen Studio. She's a very prolific Buddhist artist. She also has some articles in the book, and she very kindly let us use one of her art pieces for the cover, too.
Outstanding. Tanya, I understand that there isn't really a firm name for the book yet. It's not out at this time. And usually when we do these, it's, the book's out, it's on Amazon, I have a link to it. We're not at that stage yet. We're early on in this project, but there's a way that the listeners to the podcast may be able to help with that. Why don't you tell us about that?
Definitely. Well, we'll have a link where listeners can submit any suggestions they have for basically this anthology, which is a collection of, it's really the only theme to it is Voices of Canadian Buddhist Women, which might make for a good title.
Subtitle.
That's it.
There you go. Subtitle. Yep.
But really, that's it. We're looking for, the chosen one, the winning name, and we're really opening up, just as we've opened up this whole project in a crowdsourced kind of way. That if anybody does have a great idea for a title, we'd love to hear it. And basically, what we're going to do is open up a poll and have people vote on the top five, I believe. Of that top five, we're going to have a vote to it, and the winner will receive a free copy of the book and a mention of it within the book, that they were the one who contributed the winning name.
Excellent. And that will be on Sumeru Books' site. And we'll be linking to that site as well as, Tanya, your own. What else is there to share? Tanya, any closing thoughts about this project and just the practice in general that you'd like the listeners to hear?
I think really, I want to thank, like you said earlier, all of the contributors to this who really were quite brave when I knocked upon their door and said, hey, would you like to write something? And several of them have never written anything before. And with much cajoling and prodding, were very brave to put pen to paper and provide and submit and be very generous with their time and to contribute. So that's definitely one closing remark I'd like to add. I think, too, it's just a really important thing to think about how you can look to give back both within your community as well as just globally, and these kinds of efforts in terms of just spearheading an idea of this can go so much further in terms of other people looking to put together these kinds of anthologies on any topic, whether it be Canadian women Buddhism, which is a small subset, there's even more out there. So I think, if anybody is inspired, by the fact of two people putting their heads together to do this kind of thing, I encourage anybody to kind of do that kind of initiative, because it is very rewarding, not just from my standpoint, it was very rewarding, but just for the community at large to hear that diversity.
Thank you. And John, how about you? What else would you like to share?
Well, two things. First, I want to share something that Tanya has been sharing with me through our email conversations that she hasn't said in our conversation with you. And that is how much fun she has had making all these new Dharma friends and having this rich network of friends who will continue on after the book is finished. So I think that's really a valuable thing. Now, the second thing I want to say, men, take note. I've been working on a book about the history of Zen in North America, which is going to come out in the spring from Richard Bryan McDaniel. And I posted the table of contents about that. It's actually a two-parter. One is about the original Zen pioneers. The second part is about the second Zen generation of Zen teachers who are teaching now. And when I posted a link which had the table of contents about that, it got shared around on Facebook by, 26, 28 people or something. When I did the same thing with this unnamed anthology, all of the women Buddhists in our little Canadian Sangha picked up on it, and it got shared 486 times. So what I'm saying is, guys, the women are doing this much better than we are, right? They've got the networking thing down.
I'm not a bit surprised by that.
Well,
I kind of am, actually. I was really clear, what did we do wrong this time as women?
No. So basically, I guess what I'm saying is it's not enough just to say, oh yeah, we got to have a binder full of women Buddhists too. So like Mitt Romney, we can say, yeah, we're honoring this. But we have to really recognize that, no. This isn't just pro forma. These Buddhist teachers really have something important for us to be paying attention to. And we can't just say, oh, no, or isn't that nice? It's really a lot more than that.
Right. I think that's one of the most valuable points in this kind of work is that what we typically see in the popular media and the popular well-known teachers, it's great stuff and they're doing terrific work. It's very true. But these more niche areas and topics and teachers and practitioners and writers have meaningful, wonderful things to say too. And it's terrific to give them that voice. And Tanya, as you were saying earlier, give them that mic, step in front of it and get that awareness of what you have to say.
It's interesting. I think that sadly it's still sort of a novelty, like women as a novelty act, like where it's, women rock stars and it's never like a male fronted band, breaks through and, succeeds. And it's something that I think, many of the women that have been featured have been published in Wild Geese, which is like our seminal, Canadian Buddhist literature publication. It's the venerated one. And I think that's is that it's a double-edged sword in a lot of ways, that putting my name, up there, knowing it needs to happen, Canadian Buddhist women, it's still a sad part of the reality, that we have to kind of segment and step, stepping into the spotlight still seems like wearing that woman badge, which it's a hard challenge in some ways.
Yeah, I think you're right. Very much so. Well, for folks who've been listening to the podcast, of course, I'm linking to several different places here. Take a look and see what those are. You can find Tanya at fullcontactenlightenment.com. Tanya McGinnity, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
And John Negru, our guest, and you can find out more about his work and the work of Sumeru Books at sumeru-books.com. John, thank you so much for being here as well.
Thank you, Ted, for doing what you do.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizen Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.